Stanley G. Payne's The Franco Regime is a comprehensive examination of Francisco Franco's dictatorship in Spain, providing a detailed account of its ideological foundations, political structures, policies, and historical significance. The book is an essential resource for understanding the complex interplay of authoritarianism, nationalism, and social conservatism that characterized Franco's regime from 1939 to 1975. Payne offers a meticulously researched narrative, blending analysis with factual detail, making it one of the definitive studies on this period in Spanish history. Below is a detailed summary and analysis of key themes and arguments presented in the book. Background and ideological foundations. Payne begins by exploring the historical and ideological roots of Franco's dictatorship. Spain, deeply divided along political, regional, and cultural lines, faced a volatile situation in the early 20th century. The collapse of the monarchy, the instability of the Second Republic, 1931 to 1936, and the subsequent Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, created the conditions for Franco's rise to power. Franco positioned himself as a unifying figure, presenting his regime as the savior of Spain from the perceived threats of socialism, anarchism, and regional separatism. The ideological foundation of Francoism drew heavily from three main sources. 1. Nationalism. A central tenet of Franco's regime was the promotion of a unified Spanish identity, often at the expense of regional cultures and languages, particularly Catalan and Basque. 2. Catholic conservatism. Franco aligned himself with the Catholic Church, framing his rule as a moral and religious crusade against secularism and modernity. 3. Anti-communism. The regime's staunch opposition to communism was a cornerstone of its domestic and foreign policies, appealing to Western powers during the Cold War. Francoism was not a coherent ideology in the traditional sense, but rather a synthesis of these elements, combined with Franco's pragmatic and authoritarian leadership style. The structure of the Franco regime. Payne outlines the political structures and mechanisms through which Franco maintained control. The regime was a military dictatorship supported by a coalition of conservative forces, including monarchists, traditionalists, and the fascist-inspired Falange Española. While the Falange provided the regime with its initial revolutionary rhetoric and symbols, Franco gradually sidelined its more radical elements in favor of a pragmatic, technocratic approach. Centralization of power. Franco concentrated power in his own hands, serving simultaneously as head of state, prime minister, and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The regime lacked a formal constitution, operating instead under a series of fundamental laws that reinforced Franco's authority. These laws included the Fuero de los Españoles Charter of the Spanish, which nominally guaranteed certain rights, but subordinated them to the interests of the state. The regime maintained its grip on power through a combination of propaganda, censorship, and repression. Political opponents were persecuted, with thousands imprisoned, exiled, or executed in the aftermath of the Civil War. Payne highlights the role of institutions such as the Guardia Civil and the secret police in enforcing Franco's policies. Economic policies. Payne devotes significant attention to the economic trajectory of the Franco regime, which evolved through several distinct phases. 1. Autarky, 1939 to 1959. In the immediate post-war years, the regime pursued a policy of economic self-sufficiency. This approach, influenced by nationalist and fascist ideologies, led to widespread economic stagnation, food shortages, and black market activity. Payne describes this period as one of severe hardship for ordinary Spaniards, exacerbated by the destruction wrought by the Civil War. 2. Stabilization and growth, 1959 to 1973. Recognizing the failure of autarky, Franco implemented economic reforms in the late 1950s, guided by technocrats associated with the Opus Dei movement. These reforms marked the beginning of Spain's transition to a modern, industrialized economy. The so-called Spanish miracle of the 1960s brought rapid economic growth, improved living standards, and increased integration with global markets. 3. Economic decline, 1973 to 1975. The final years of Franco's rule coincided with the global economic crisis of the 1970s, which exposed the regime's structural weaknesses, cultural and social policies. Franco's regime sought to impose a conservative cultural model rooted in traditional Catholic values. Payne examines the regime's efforts to control education, media, and public morality. The Catholic Church played a central role in shaping cultural policy, enjoying significant influence over schools and universities. However, Payne also notes the regime's inability to fully suppress cultural diversity and regional identities. Despite efforts to impose Castilian Spanish as the national language, Catalan, Basque, and Galician cultures persisted, often flourishing clandestinely. Foreign policy. Franco's foreign policy was marked by pragmatism and opportunism. Payne traces the regime's shifting alliances and strategies over time. During World War II, Franco maintained a policy of neutrality, despite ideological sympathies with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. This decision allowed Spain to avoid the devastation of the war while benefiting from economic aid in the post-war period. During the Cold War, Franco positioned Spain as a bulwark against communism, securing support from the United States and other Western powers. This alignment culminated in Spain's inclusion in military and economic agreements, such as the 1953 Pact of Madrid, which brought U.S. military bases and financial aid to the country. The legacy of Francoism. One of the central questions Payne addresses is the legacy of Franco's regime. While Franco succeeded in maintaining his grip on power until his death in 1975, the long-term viability of his system was less certain. Payne argues that the regime's rigid authoritarianism and reliance on Franco's personal authority left it ill-prepared for the challenges of modernization and democratization. The transition to democracy following Franco's death was facilitated by the gradual erosion of the regime's ideological coherence and the emergence of new social and political forces. Payne suggests that while Francoism left a lasting imprint on Spanish society, its ultimate failure to adapt to changing circumstances ensured its demise. Analysis and critique. Payne's The Franco regime is notable for its depth and balance. He avoids both hagiography and condemnation, offering a nuanced portrait of Franco and his government. The book is particularly strong in its analysis of the regime's internal dynamics and its relationship with broader historical trends. However, some critics have argued that Payne's focus on political and institutional history comes at the expense of a deeper exploration of social and cultural aspects. While Payne acknowledges the suffering endured by many under Franco's rule, his emphasis on the regime's stability and pragmatism may strike some readers as overly detached. Stanley G. Payne's The Franco Regime is a landmark study that provides invaluable insights into one of the most complex and controversial periods in modern Spanish history. By tracing the evolution of Francoism from its origins to its eventual decline, Payne illuminates the interplay of ideology, power, and pragmatism that define the dictatorship. The book remains an essential resource for scholars and students of modern Spain, offering both a detailed narrative and a thoughtful analysis of the Franco regime's place in 20th century history.